Ryszard Kapuściński, 2007. When I heard that Ryszard Kapuściński had died, I felt I'd lost a friend. No, more than that, an essential person in my life. A person, one of the few surely who could be trusted to tell the truth about complex and difficult events. Not in abstract terms, but in their concrete details, their color, smell, feel, touch, their weather. Yet I didn't know Ryszard Kapuściński very well at all. It was the rare quality of his, this befriending of people at a distance. I first met Kapuściński in 1984. I was living with my family, Graham Gibson, our 7-year-old daughter, in West Berlin, which was at that time still surrounded by the famous Berlin Wall. It was there that I began The Handmaid's Tale. The tone for a novel about a modern totalitarianism was readily available. East German fighter planes broke the sound barrier every Sunday, reminding us by their sonic booms that they could sweep down any moment. The Soviet bloc stretched out to the east and seemed as solid as a rock. We traveled to East Germany with its surly border guards and its nail polish ice cream and its smiley people's era chocolate, and to Czechoslovakia, where, to say anything real, we had to go out to the middle of the park, so afraid were our Czech friends of being bugged. Finally, we went to Poland, which was another story altogether. Poland had always been viewed by its neighbors as recklessly brave or as bravely reckless. The well known anecdote about the Polish cavalry charging the German tanks on horseback may or may not have been true, but it was emblematic. And that recklessness or defiance was still there in Warsaw in 1984. Taxi drivers wouldn't drive you anywhere unless you had hard currency. Writers offered you armful of samizdat, unofficial publications which they kept stored right on the premises of the supposedly communist writers' organization. While we were there, priest had been found murdered, presumably by the secret police. There was a Catholic parade, and as we watched the flinty eyed nuns and the angry, determined priests and their crowds of followers, we thought, this regime is in trouble. And then we met the man who helped bring it down. Kapuściński wrote The Emperor Downfall of an Autocrat in 1978. On the surface, it's about Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and the collapse of his corrupt and absolutist regime, and read simply as that, it's a terrific book. Kapuściński, the journalist with the Polish recklessness that took him through 27 coups and revolutions, streams of refugees heading one way, away from trouble, Kapuściński heading the other way, into the middle of it, get himself to Addis Ababa and sneaks around at night interviewing former courtiers who are now in hiding and setting down anecdotes about the emperor that range from the unintentionally comic his cushion provider had to be to slide exactly the right size of cushion under his feet for every chair he sat on, as to the risk of leaving his short legs dangling, to the horrifying beggar's gravel scrapes from palace feasts, eyeballs squirt from sockets. But the emperor had another level of meaning for the Poles, who, throughout the Nazi occupation and then under the Soviets, had become used to speaking in coded language. As Kapuściński himself says of those times in Travels with Herodotus, nothing was ever plain, literal, unambiguous. From behind every gesture and word peered some referential sign, gazed a meaningfully winking eye. Thus, because of one corrupt autocratic regime is likely to have many things in common with another, the emperor could be read as a critique of the moribund Polish communist government. The book quickly made it on the stage, in one dramatization after another, and contributed greatly to the popular unrest that finally toppled those in power. The brilliance of the emperor as a tactic was that communists could hardly object to it. For wasn't it about badness of monarchy, a form of government to which they were devotedly opposed? The Emperor was translated into English in 1983, just in time for us to read it and then to meet Kapuściński in Warsaw in 1984 and to shake his hand. He was a member of same extraordinary generation that included Tadeusz Kantor, the outstanding director and playwright, and the novelist Tadeusz Konwicki, men who had lived through the Second World War as children only to reach adulthood within one party communist system, but had nevertheless managed to produce astonishing works of art. Although Kapuscinski's settings were many and his material varied, his underlying themes remained constant: fear and oppression and how people cope with or transcend it, meager circumstances and how they can both warp and ennoble, the stifling, drawn out torture of political monocultures, and the abiding desire of human beings to possess their own souls. Such themes are entirely understandable in the view of Kapuscinski's own constrained youth. Kapuscinski seemed to me shy and charming and diffident. Graham said that might be so, but underneath all that he was hard as nails. I suppose he would have been both. The shyness and charm and diffidence kept him from being shot at roadblocks in the midst of chaotic civil wars, and the nail like hardness propelled him towards those roadblocks in the first place. There was always something surreal about the encounters with genuine writers inside the Soviet bloc in those days, and maybe Kapuscinski's diffidence was caused in part by this surrealism. At polite official occasions, there was what was said, and then there was what was not said, but was supposed to be understood. Why do you have so many beautifully illustrated children's picture books in Poland? I asked another writer at a book fair. Think about it, she replied, by which she must have meant that there was no problematic political content in kids' picture books. In January 1986, Kapuscinski was in Toronto for the English publication in his 1982 book, Shah of Shahs, about the spectacular overthrow of the Shah of Iran and his brutal regime, which featured Savak, his hideous, torturing secret police. This book bears rereading now, so prescient it is about the patterns that continue to unfold in the Muslim world. Kapuscinski was going to appear at the Harbour Front International Writers Series, and he was nervous. He didn't think his English was good enough for a public reading. Would I be his English voice and do the readings from his books for him? I said I would be honored, but at the same time I was thinking, wait a minute, Ryszard Kapuscinski is nervous about reading in English? In safe, unthreatening Toronto where everyone will love him even if he manages to blurt out only one word? What about the murderous turmoil in Congo, the bomb falling in Honduras, and the life-risking riots in revolutionary Tehran? Kapuscinski's nervousness on that Toronto occasion was endearing. It was also sort of like Mary, Queen of Scots, worrying about whether her cap was on the straight while on her way to scaffold. But then there is no predicting other people's fear of nervousness. Because he was a foreign correspondent for many years, Poland's only foreign correspondent, Kapuściński, seemed ubiquitous, at least when it came to rotten political structures and their moments of crumbling or catastrophe or dire bloodshed. Where there was chaos, there he would be. In Imperium, which he describes his journeys to Soviet Union in 1989-1991, just as it was coming unglued, there is a characteristic passage. The news exploded that a large city of million inhabitants had been poisoned severely, dangerously, mortally. "A new Chernobyl," commented a friend who relayed the news to me. "I'm going there," I replied. "If I can get a seat, I'm flying tomorrow." All his life Kapuscinski longed to travel, and his longed to travel so precisely to these places that the ordinary pleasure seeking tourist would take pains to avoid. It's therefore more than appropriate that in his last book, Travels with Herodotus, he invoked the first famous travel writer of his kind, Herodotus, the father of history. What Kapuscinski wanted more than anything as a young man was to cross the border. At first, the border of Poland, but then increasingly every possible border. What drove him on was his endless curiosity about humanity in all its forms. Like Herodotus, he listened and recorded, but did not blame. All his life he was on a quest rather than a mission. What was it that he wanted to find? Exotic detail, certainly, cultural differences, the rich patchwork that had been so absent in post war Poland. But beyond that, even in the midst of the most extreme bloodshed and sadistic revenge and degradation, our common human goodness. In what lies our hope? Perhaps it was dignity, that simple dignity that is everywhere the target of oppressors, but that can never be entirely eradicated. The dignity that says no. Surely no other writer has had greater grounds for pessimism considering all that he saw, but this is not an emotion Kapuscinski expressed often. More frequent was a note of wonder that such things, both splendid and squalid, can exist on earth. Near the end of Travels with Herodotus, there is a single line. It describes merely a scene inside the Turkish museum, but it is a ring of an epitaph for this modest man who was superlative witness to our times, and so I will place it as one. We stand in darkness, surrounded by light.